And thanks, Marin, for being here. Excited to talk to you, as I always am. I just want to say Marin is doing such remarkable work with the Hopper Art Trust to bring the work of her father to a 21st century audience, some of which is represented here tonight in this very nice room. And, you know, I guess I could say a recent project in collaboration with Damiani, the publisher here, is this book that we're all poring over called Drugstore Camera, which is, you know, what to say, it's, you know, as handsome and as strange and wonderful as Dennis Hopper himself in some ways. And, you know, interestingly...
I'm delighted to be here tonight and be interviewed by the divine Mark.
Well, I'll try to live up to the highest, impeccably high standard. But, you know, there's, you know, your father was somewhat, you know, was famous for a lot of things. I was going to say he's famous for saying this next thing. Maybe that's not exactly right. But he, you know, he did say that after Easy Rider, he never carried a camera again. That was 1969. And as this book demonstrates, that was maybe not exactly the whole truth. Can you tell us a little bit about this collection?
Of course. He had always said that he'd put down the camera when he started directing Easy Rider, but you know, he was someone who was a collector of art, of objects, and after he died, he had a huge amount of storage. I mean, we would lift up doors and self-storages and we'd be like, oh my gosh, and put them right back down. I mean, it was just so much to go through. And there was one section that was dedicated to his years in Taos, and we had everything from his, I mean, his checkbook from, you know, you know, that he wrote checks to the Taos liquor store, and you were like, well, he saved everything. And in a little box that was marked personal, there were these extraordinary pictures that he'd obviously taken, and they were from the Taos drugstore, and he'd developed all the pictures from this little, you know, these little camera. I guess it's sort of like on his road trip when he left Los Angeles to go to Taos, he documented it and just sort of never. It was put away in a drawer. An assistant wrote personal files, and I said, "Oh my God, these are actual photographs that are, you know, in their, you know, actual print from the drugstore. These little tiny prints, and they're so intimate, yet they're so in the style of how he framed things in his work. And it was such an extraordinary time in his life where he had left his family, he divorced my mother, he felt very excited about, you know, his doing Easy Rider, but he was, you know, and he was on to doing the last movie. And you can see it's really this extraordinary road trip that he captures in these pictures, and they're quite intimate because they're pictures of me at the Grand Canyon. There's pictures of his girlfriend Felicia, who I was madly in love with. I thought she was so glamorous and so divine, and she wore these fur jackets, and she was, you know, just, I mean, fabulous. She had big rose-colored glasses, and I don't know. So we went on this, I remember going on the road trip, and anyway, so we found these.
And how was that road trip? I just have to ask.
Well, it was quite, we went in my, well, we were very good friends with the Rafelsons. Bob Rafelson had produced Easy Rider, and his wife, Toby, was a production designer, and their two children were my close friends, and they had a daughter. So we all piled back in the back of their station wagon and drove off and kind of wandered through, you know, the changing landscape of Los Angeles to the Southwest. And we stopped at all the places you stop at when you're, you know, classic family trip in the, you know, early 70s. You go to the Grand Canyon, you know, you buy moccasins. I got to buy, you know, wear boys' Levi pants, you know, jeans. I thought that was so cool. And my father was just, you know, he was in a very reflective kind of stage in his life, and it was a period that I always asked him about. Actually, I thought, gosh, did you ever take pictures of Taos? He was like, no, I wish I had, blah blah blah. And so when I found these, they were extraordinary because it shows his he went to Taos and he opened a gallery called Dennis Hopper's Works of Art, and he made these extraordinary T-shirts with the turquoise necklaces sort of printed on them, and he gave them out, and many people in Taos still wear theirs. And so there's like, everyone remembers this period of him coming to Taos, and he bought this fabulous house called Los Galos, which was Mabel Dodge's ranch. And she was such an extraordinary woman, and she was someone who really brought the cross culture of artists and writers, and D.H. Lawrence and George O'Keeffe, and all these extraordinary people together at her house. And so when my father saw that it was for sale, he was super excited when he was scouting Easy Rider to take it on and to recreate that kind of energy there. And so this is the period of time that all happened in. It was such a treasure to find it.
I'm curious about that house, which I know is also referred to as the Mud Palace at the time, which seems like a fitting somehow name for that era, that place, the personalities. What was it like to hang out there with the kind of community that Dennis was gathering around himself at that time, which was also kind of a tricky time in terms of his life and career?
I think it was really, I remember going there and thinking it was kind of the most extraordinarily beautiful place I'd ever been to, because it was so unusual, yet it was so kind of formal. It was because Mabel had lived in Florence, and she'd brought all these pieces. I don't know how she got them there, actually, because in the days that she was in the 1920s, getting to Taos was really, it's no easy feat now, but in the 1920s, with the carts and carriages and horses and all that, and I don't know, she had this extraordinary table, which was the dining room table in the house, which you can see in his movie that was made about him called American Friend. He sits at it a lot. It's this enormous piece of furniture from table from Florence, and it was hand carved, and it weighs about 1,000 tons. I don't know how she got it from Florence to Taos, but she did. And she has extraordinary Spanish chairs around them. And I just thought it was the first time I'd really seen, like, she had George O'Keeffe paintings, she had tapestries, Fortuny tapestries from Venice, she had Indian blankets. It was that extraordinary mix of very, very exotically European style mix with this extraordinary southwestern trajectory of blankets and silver vases and Navajo pottery. And I just thought, gosh, it was like a wild world of just this mixture of times and textures and periods, and it was the first time I'd really seen that kind of blend. And she had it. When my father bought the house, he bought the house with all the contents in it, so it was a big part of the feeling of the house when you went there. Anyway, going on and on.
I'm interested in the documentary that you mentioned, The American Dreamer, right, which was shot in Taos about your father at that time. And there's really quite a remarkable scene, I think probably in the house, where he's got a bunch of his prints laid out, and he's saying to the off-camera filmmaker something like, "This is all that's going to be left. I'm going to be ashes." Right, and he's trying to explain this, and I know that he told you that he really wanted to be remembered for his photography.
Yes. He said, everyone knows me as an actor, and I'd really want to promote my work as a photographer, and I want to continue to really make that happen. And will you help me after I'm gone to do that? And he felt even more than his films that this was where his heart was, and this is sort of an untainted, pure vision of how he looked at the world. And I always thought there were storyboards of actual movies that he was thinking of, but he had complete control over. Because when you make a film, there's a lot of people that are involved with it, which is great. It's a very collaborative experience. But I think this was a pure vision that he really wanted to be remembered for.
And there's this quality with these pictures from this era, roughly, we're talking about like 70 to 72-ish,
Yes.
3-ish.
Yes.
I mean, they're pretty down and dirty. They're a little like, they feel a little tossed. You know, we talk about like the disposable camera. They have
Yeah.
that quality of being like
Right.
highly, you know, maybe disposable themselves. But for that, like, incredibly, you know, intimate in the moments that they capture. I'm wondering, you know, maybe you could talk about how these pictures contrast with some of the pictures your father took that might be more familiar to us from, you know, the 60s, from that era before, you know, he never carried a camera again.
I think the big difference is that with the 60s photographs, he was frustrated that he wasn't directing films then. And there was a time where he had become very close friends with lots of artists. And he was friends with Andy Warhol, who came, you know, the whole world of the art world had really moved to Los Angeles, the whole pop art world. And he was a big part of being friends with all the artists. And all the Ferris Gallery was there. And it was the stable of artists like Ed Ruscha and Billy Al Bengston, and you know, and they also had a lot of New York artists that showed there. And so he would travel in Venice. He'd go to Venice a lot, and he was a big part of that scene. And he really, Irving Blum, who was in charge of the Ferris Gallery, was a big part of promoting him as a photographer. He was friends with artists. He loved hanging out with them. They were his friends, and they loved to dress up for the camera. So he was having this great time taking pictures, and a lot of them were the promotions for the Ferris Gallery.
The Ferris, the studs, right?
The studs.
As they like to
the studs,
be known.
exactly. And the most famous one, I think, of that group is really Ed Ruscha. But there's, you know, there was Ken Price, there was, as I said, Billy Al Bengston, Larry Bell, and then the other New York artists, such as, you know, well, there was also a billboard factory downtown where all the artists really made a lot of money painting. So Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, James Rosenquist, they spent a lot of time in Los Angeles at the billboard factories painting. And a lot of the pictures from the 60s were of that kind of moment as well. And in fact, later, when my father was taking his pictures from the 60s, he had a lot of the original billboard artists that those guys worked with paint some of his photographs into billboards. And so it was a very big part of his vision. But I got off track. Oh, we were talking about. So he was so in terms of the time where before this book, where he took all the pictures from the 60s, he was also hired by Diana Vreeland. My mother was a model, and she had been hired by Diana, you know, to model for Vogue. And she thought, your husband's so cool. I hear he takes pictures, and he's on that whole scene in Los Angeles. Can't he take some pictures for us? Some cool rock bands, and I'll send him some actors. And my father was in the actor studio, so he took pictures of his friends, Paul Newman. He took pictures of Jefferson Airplane, Buffalo Springfield, all these bands that he was very close to. And so he was on the scene, and he sort of had a kind of great eye and a great feeling for composition. And that's sort of so there's an insider's view. He went on all the marches, and so he was very good at capturing that period and an insider's view, but it was a little bit more formal, I think, the composition, whereas the pictures in this book are more intimate and more a road trip, a kind of traveling point in his life. And at the end of this book, you see many pictures of, you know, relations he had with women, and this kind of like great comfort he had with exploring his sexual senses and all, you know, all that. So
yeah, and we will look at some pictures shortly.
Until I know all about it. Without
but you know, I'm fascinated with this era, and it also suggests that your dad at that time, I mean, on some level, was really kind of going for it as a photographer. I mean, he was shooting for Vogue, he was doing some album covers, he had these great relationships with the Ferris Gallery crew with the factory crew in New York. I mean, there's the fascinating stories of the party that your parents threw for Andy Warhol in 1963 when Warhol had driven cross-country, had done his sort of Americana Route 66 road trip, and then came to your parents' house on North Crescent Drive, right? Is that? Yeah.
Right.
And so fascinating. Were you at that party?
I was probably at the party. I was very, very little, but I just remember my parents' house had burnt down at the Bel Air fire, and they had gotten some insurance money, and they had to start totally anew. They had lost everything in this fire. So they went and they bought, they went to thrift stores and antique stores, and back in those days in Los Angeles, no one had antiques in their houses. They thought they were dirty. They would make copies of antiques. So it was very unusual to go buy these sort of like old used antiques. So they created what they called the Pop House, and they got all their paintings from the Ferris Gallery, and all the, from Andy's soup cans to Frank Stella's, paintings, and Roy Lichtenstein. They filled the house with art, and they went to the billboard factories, and they wallpapered the walls with some of the billboard pictures, and it just became this extraordinary. They had a big French, street lamp in their living room, and it was a clown on the ceiling. And so they got it ready for Andy's arrival in Los Angeles. And Andy arrived, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, everyone's so good looking."
Such a great Andy impersonation, by the way. I love it. Oh my gosh.
I know, everyone's so good looking. I just anyway. So they were. It was an exciting time, and he really captured it.
I can't help but to ask. I mean, what was your room like at North Crescent Heights? I mean, with
I remember my mother.
full of antiques and Rouchés and Warhols.
No, and my mother had this fetish where she thought I looked like a blonde angel, so she would collect all these like Valentine's angel blonde. So I had all these pictures all over. But and our bathroom had billboard pictures, usually lips and like parts of hats and heads and hot dogs, and so we grew up in the Pop House.
Nice.
But I love the clown on the ceiling. That was my favorite. I used to lie down and stare up, and I'd hula hoop in front of all the paintings, and I would look at them. So that was my. So.
I think Ed Rouché said somewhere about how your dad was one of maybe 4 people in Hollywood who really gave a hoot about modern art, and I think probably more typical of the time for a Hollywood mogul to be trying to scare up old masters or find these trophy, works to stuff into a, ginormous house in, Bel Air or something. And your father's such an interesting figure. I mean, he's sort of the one guy who really seems to be the glue there in this interesting nexus between Hollywood and rock and roll and the art world at that time, this incredibly rich cultural moment that is probably as rich as anything that ever happened in New York or Paris or Berlin or London. I'm sorry to say to New York, but
yeah, he was very. He would always encourage everyone to buy what they loved and to not collect just to collect, because he felt in Hollywood a lot of people were feeling pressured to invest in this painting or that painting because they thought it was the right painting to buy, as opposed, and there was a self-consciousness to it where he was like, buy what you love, follow your instincts, and so he was big supporter. He was an extraordinary melting pot of loving rock and roll and putting music to films. I remember when MTV came out, he was like, I've already done that with Easy Rider. I took pre-made music and put it to images, and so
Right. Now it's interesting thinking of your father. So I think of him as so emblematic of Los Angeles at that time, and I know others have said that you get this virtual kind of visual, a record of Los Angeles in those earlier pictures, and then now here he is in Taos, let's say, toward the end of the decade, the beginning of the next decade. You touched on some of this, but what was it about Taos that appealed to him so much, that drew him to that place where he spent a lot of time in the 70s, period of exile from Hollywood?
I think when he was scouting for Easy Rider, he shot at the Pueblo there, and also in the jail scenes with Jack Nicholson were shot in the town square jail there. And I think he felt it was a great oasis. I think he felt he had failed. His personal life had fallen apart with the relationship. This is what he always talked to me about, anyway. Taos was an extraordinary. I mean, as much as it was, there was the Mud Palace and all that, it was an extraordinary place where many, like Millicent Rogers had arrived there. It was kind of strangely small town, but very glamorous. And I think there was that draw of the sort of Pueblo and the sort of blue, the beautiful blue mountains and the blue lakes, and the whole kind of mystique around that. And he felt understood and embraced there. Culturally and also artistically, he felt that after Mabel Dodge's house and her whole hub was really a big part of why he wanted to buy that house and recreate a kind of community for artists and writers and filmmakers to kind of gather. And he ended up editing his movie, the last movie there. And I remember that very clearly. I used to make drawings and then knock on the editing door, and he'd be like, oh, here's the drawing. It was kind of a wild house because there was this long hallway with all these doors in the center outdoor courtyard, and I used to knock on all the doors and open them up and see all these kind of crazy characters who would come to create with him. So it's a wild time.
That's wild. Well, let's look at some of those crazy characters now, if you want to go through the slideshow and maybe give us some captions on the fly.
Sure.
Not so easy for me to see it, but
sorry.
do you want to?
Oh, I do.
Yeah,
I do
okay.
this. I just press this.
Let me show you.
Okay.
Yeah, just to the right when you want to switch sides.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much.
Now, who's that?
Oh wow, that's me and my moccasins and my boys' jeans that are like hanging over the side.
Did you get those moccasins at like a trading post
I was
off the
so
highway?
excited.
So
I was like,
excellent.
wow.
Look at that.
And also, my brothers were only allowed to wear blue jeans, and I was really excited that I was wearing blue jeans. So that was a big deal.
Wait, so you weren't allowed to wear blue jeans?
No,
you were
but
Dennis
on this
Hopper's
trip,
daughter. Okay.
On this trip, I got to wear them. So, okay.
You have a distinct look of, can we go now?
I know. Sleepy from the long trip.
And that is the Grand Canyon?
That is the Grand Canyon,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow.
Oh, there's Felicia. She's so glamorous.
Yeah.
I remember sitting on her lap in the fur coat, and we're playing with her ring zipper from, so 70s.
Also Grand Canyon?
Also Grand Canyon.
And did you hit the Grand Canyon on your way into Taos? Is
Yes.
that what was happening? Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
No PETA.
No PETA. No PETA there.
And do you know the Felicia, any more that you remember about Felicia or who she was or?
Yes. Felicia was, okay, so this is the story of Felicia. She was, actually, she was Jack Nicholson's girlfriend before. And then she ended up going out with my father, and they were all very close friends. They had traveled to Cannes Film Festival with Easy Rider, and she was this lovely woman. She'd grown up in Taos, and I think probably when they were scouting for Easy Rider, they had all met up, and so
okay.
Anyway, so this is part of the road trip. More.
Wow.
Gorgeous.
This one I love. I mean, do you have any recollection of where that was taken? Is that like Deshay or something?
Yes, I
or?
think this is the Canyon Deshay. Yeah, I think this is yeah.
It has that feeling of, I don't know, I mean, sort of classic.
Western.
Yeah.
Like, like a Sam Peckinpah.
Yeah,
like.
totally. And I'm thinking of the old, like Carlton Watkins or
yeah.
Edward Curtis, that
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. But I could see how like a film guy like your dad would be so drawn to just such a panorama.
Wide open, sculptural.
Amazing. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the first gallery he opened in Taos called Dennis Hopper Works of Art, and this is his opening party, one of the opening parties. I was super excited to see. I don't think there were any other pictures ever taken, so I'm very happy to see these.
Do you remember that? Were you at that event?
I
Were you back
remember.
in
I don't know
LA?
that I was at that event, but I remember probably I was. But I remember going to the opening. I remember the gallery very well, and
You can see that sign now.
yes,
Should
It's-
you care to.
it's in our fabulous new store called Hayward House, and we have a room dedicated to this exhibition of some of the prints from the book, and also the T-shirts with the necklaces that we recreated, and so we encourage you to come.
They're quite nice.
See.
And that's 71st Street, right on the east side.
70th between
70.
Park and Lex.
Okay.
And
Hayward
so
House.
It's open Monday through Saturday, 10 to 6.
It's pretty great. You come into a room and then you see that sign at the far end. It's pretty great.
The interesting thing about these photographs, the other thing that we were saying earlier about the 60s versus this time, is that they were printed so small, and he never really printed things as small, except when he had his first exhibit in the early, actually in '69, he decided to make all of his photographs in a small format, very small, and we called it the Lost Album because it was a show, his first show that he did at the Fort Worth Museum in Texas, and then he put it away and never brought it out again, and he always printed his prints very large. So these are very, very little, so there's something very intimate about them.
By the way, Marin, how many of these did you find in that box called Personal? Did you do an edit to put this together?
Yes,
Okay.
there was about 50 pictures, and we edited to these. So this is the opening again, and right here on the right-hand side, the woman with the white shirt is actually Daria Halperin. My father married her after he got to Taos. They had met. She was the star of Zabritsky's Point, and she's the mother of my sister Ruth Anna. Very beautiful, wonderful woman. So, and she was a big part of him opening the gallery as well. Her father was Lawrence Halperin, who was a big landscape architect who worked with Frank Gehry for years in San Francisco, and started a fabulous place called Sea Ranch, which is a big part of the Sonoma coast.
Right.
Gorgeous.
With
The logo.
the Moore architecture and
The
all that.
Moore,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's really cool. And did your dad know Frank Gehry back in when clustered around Ferris Gallery?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they were always really close friends, and they they worked together on certain things. Frank ended up making some of the houses for him on his property in Venice.
Cool.
Well, this is one of my father. This is the eye of my father that reminds me so much of him. The sense of humor and the sort of macabre note. So this must have been on his way. He found, he's always with his camera, and he was just taking, lots of pictures, and always had an eye for the unusual and interesting. So this is
Yeah, it's amazing.
one of these pictures. This is, he loved graveyards, and on his trip to Taos, we must have been stopping at one of the churches, and he went out and took pictures and found this fabulous lone cowboy in the cemetery, which looks like him actually not him, but the kind of essence of how he was dressed in those days. And,
Marin, do you go back to Taos much?
I do. My father is buried there, and he lived across from the rancho. After he sold the Mud Palace, he moved to the theater, the original 1920s theater in Taos, and he renovated it into an art studio, painting studio, and he took the projection room, which was upstairs, and he made it his bedroom, and he made a window so he could look out onto Ranchos de Taos, which is the famous church that George O'Keeffe painted religiously. And so I go back a lot to we have a house there, so it's house too.
And I was reading about this new tradition that was started maybe last year, the annual Dennis Hopper motorcycle ride. Is this going to stick? Because
Yes,
it sounds pretty great.
It was really fun. We covered it last year for the New York Times, and it was the first year that it happened. And this year it tripled in size. Patricia Arquette was the big part of the movement of getting everyone involved, and it's great. We think it's going to happen every year.
Right.
Okay, so this is the oasis of comfort during a stressful time.
Where are they now?
These must have been some local beauties that he, but divine. Like I mean, who doesn't want to look like that? Actually,
Can you imagine if you were working in the drugstore when that came in?
I
you
would
had
have
to
been so
develop
excited. My gosh,
these-
look at the ropes and the fur and the.
Were
two
these
beauties.
women in the documentary as well? do you know?
Probably, and this was not an uncommon. When you open door number 3 in the bedroom set, you would get these lovely women. You'd be like, oh, okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So this was probably one of the shot in one of the guest rooms, because Los Galas had like 20 bedrooms, so there was
Also have
lots
to
of room.
say, I hope not wearing Felicia's fur.
No, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. No. I'm sorry. Here's another one. I actually love this picture. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And who is that? Do we know?
Another door number 4. That's another.
Personal.
It's a fur 70s cinematic. Oh, is that it?
Was that it?
That's it?
Wow, okay. So a taste of what's in store in this little trove. And speaking of trove, are there more pictures that we haven't seen? That I know that you did an edit here, but other, I guess I'm asking what might be next for, is there another book or art or something?
Yeah,
to be seen?
I was thinking, I was going through his archives, and I was thinking that the next step really, he took 1 million Polaroids of everything documenting all of Los Angeles in terms of his movie colors and all of the graffiti and all the gangs there. And I'm thinking there's such beautiful Polaroids of Los Angeles during, the 80s through the 90s, and I'm thinking that's the next book that we want to do and celebrate. Anyway. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Exciting. Does anybody have questions?
Oh, yeah,
Have you
questions. Sorry, yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I guess we covered everything, Marin.
Questions. Okay.
Well, we invite you to stick around. Please do meet Marin, get your book signed, and thank you for coming. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much.